the owner and director of D&J Gallery, and we're having a conversation between some of the patient artists and the medical practitioner. She's a nurse practitioner, at Cedar Sinai Medical Center, and my co-curator, Ted Meyer, is moderating. And this program is called Art and Med, and it's we're doing exhibits about chronic health conditions. This one specific is about Crohn's and colitis, IBD, and all of the artists have Crohn's and they do work about their illness.
Ready? Okay. I also want to say that Daniel here put a tremendous amount of work in the beginning too. So even though he doesn't have the official curator title, he did a tremendous amount of work. So give him a little hand too. All right. You guys, all of you, including our medical specialist here, have to deal with Crohn's and IBS. And I was going over some facts and just like the amount of money that's spent, $8.5 billion a year on treatment for this. 3.1 million adults have this, so it's way more common than I thought. And I guess that's probably because a lot of people don't want to talk about, like, people will talk about cancer, they'll talk about a heart transplant, but it doesn't really seem like something everybody would want to talk about. Mm-hmm. I'm going to start with all you guys talking about when you got diagnosed, because Daniel and I have talked about this a lot, like being a child with an illness and then you were diagnosed very young. You were middle school, and you were later in life, right? I was 15. Yeah. So why don't you guys first talk about being a kid with this and sort of learning to live with it, and then we'll get into adult questions.
Well, yeah, I was diagnosed when I was 5 years old. Really, they think I had it since birth, but 5 years old, we were on a trip to see my family back east, had to fly home, and I was put into the hospital, and all sorts of traumatic stuff happened, and that's when I was first diagnosed with ulcerative colitis. And later I was re-diagnosed with Crohn's disease. Yeah, and so I had a lot of my surgeries while in school. So I had an ileostomy in, I think, 6th grade. So, and there was all the bathroom stuff in school that's really embarrassing. And, I have a painting, I think it's around the corner over there, called Shame, which is about when I first came back to school with, this big, almost foot-long scar, ileostomy, etc. Yeah, and it was that was the 70s and early 80s, and definitely something that you didn't want to talk about very much.
Okay, before we go, I totally got ahead of myself. So many questions. I forgot I couldn't do everybody's bio. So, Morgan is a pediatric nurse practitioner in Los Angeles. You got your master's in University of Pennsylvania, and you're at Cedar Sinai now. You feel like you were sort of destined for the field because you landed up, like you said, at 15, sort of showing symptoms. You talk about being destined. You also say, I think I've been through most of the procedures, interventions, etc., that my patients have, so you can be truthful and honest about how the experience will feel, which is all of us with illness don't always find that. Lowell Dylan, diagnosed at age 2, you're now 24, and you're an advocate, and you work with your mom in connecting the cure and helping younger people understand what they're going through. You are the child of our wonderful gallery director and a writer, and your writing is behind you. Okay, now we can continue. You talk about first getting diagnosed and dealing with that.
I always dealt with symptoms growing up, trips here and there, you're in the bathroom in the middle of the night, and you're right, you don't want to talk about it because who wants to talk about poop? Like, that's what I always used to say, is I would bring it up and they're like, oh, Nathan, you don't want to talk about this. It's disgusting. like, oh, can we talk about something else? Or you're making me lose my appetite. But then I think I was around 12 when I would miss about 10, 15 minutes of every class period, the second period of math class. I was taking Algebra 1. And then going on further, in ninth grade, they sort of diagnosed me with intestinal migraines and IBS. And they said it's not everything but Crohn's. So they could rule out everything but Crohn's, but they couldn't call it Crohn's yet until I was about 14, 15, 16 maybe. And you're just missing days of school. Actually, I missed so many days of school in ninth grade. They wanted me to repeat the year, and then my friends thought I transferred schools.
That's a lot to get out of algebra. And what about you, Hal?
I'm Lowell. Hi, everyone. I was diagnosed with Crohn's, or with IBD when I was 2. It was colitis when I was 2, and then the diagnosis was changed to Crohn's when I was 5. And I've had a lot of surgeries and procedures. When I was 12, I was in 7th grade, and I had my bowel perforated during a double balloon colonoscopy, and needed to have emergency surgery and bowel resection, and then had an ileostomy for a year. Sort of started missing a lot of school then. But I always had symptoms, it's sort of different for me because a lot of people, like Daniel was diagnosed when he was 5, so you have some memory of it. I guess probably not very much, but I don't really have the experience of living a normal life and then getting Crohn's. It's sort of, I've just always dealt with it for me, dealing with it.
So we've talked before about sort of like having to deal with other kids in school at that age and figuring out a way around all these things. Like, how is that to like have something like this? Because I can't think of anything harder than like being in elementary school and like, oh, Daniel poops, Daniel, having some sort of thing involved with pooping at 7 or 8 just seems like hell.
Yeah. Well, I don't know. Somehow I managed. I remember when I was right around, I guess when I was diagnosed, it was around that same age. I was like also, like in addition to just having all this stuff, I was like the smallest because I wasn't getting nutrition. My absorption was really poor. So I was getting picked on, and I remember making a decision, and my mom remembers me like coming home and saying, no matter what, I'm not going to take this anymore, and I'm going to fight back. And so maybe that little bit of crazy pushed some of that away. I remember when I got back from surgery, people asking me there was some cruelty, I think, but I also was lucky that around that same time when I was diagnosed, I also met my lifelong best friend who, was always, he was always there for me. And so I didn't have too much, like direct name calling kind of stuff. It was more how I felt, just sort of feeling, like, oh, my stomach's rumbling, or I hope later when I had my ostomy doesn't make noise, and just having to go to the bathroom. But I had a pretty good situation at the school. They were pretty understanding, especially for back then in the 70s.
I was going to say.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
Some of the things of having Crohn's in the 80s or my time having Crohn's is pretty horrifying to think about.
Yeah.
Honestly. So I'm lucky I'm in the 21st century. But yeah, I was going to say sorry to interrupt you.
No, go ahead.
The thing about having a friend, like when I got my ileostomy, all the kids at school were really supportive and nice to me, but it's because I was always sort of I was small and I was like the sick kid, and everyone was very nice, but it was very superficial, sort of. But I did have one friend who sort of understood what I was going through. I could talk to really. which was important for me to have also.
I had to switch friend groups a couple times, and you know, I was in band class, actually, or orchestra, and I had to leave for about 25 minutes, and the orchestra teacher had to defend me to the kids who were making fun of me, and and just, I would be in the library because it makes you feel so terrible that you just want to close up. You don't want to even interact with anyone because you don't feel good about yourself, but then also it's such a tumultuous time, being in school, like middle school to high school, or even earlier, where you're just you're so insecure anyway, and that you don't want to put yourself out there when you don't feel good about yourself, when you don't feel good.
Yeah, and I just got to pipe in when you said band class. I remember when I was in, I think 7th grade, I had a surgery. I missed 39 days, and my choir, I think it was like choir or something. The teacher made it a thing in front of the class that she read off everyone's absences, and when she got to mine, she's like 39, as if I was intentionally doing this. Yeah.
The teacher
Oh
did
yeah, I had a
similar
surgery
thing.
to get out of choir.
Yeah, I would. So, Morgan, and then I'll have you speak to this since you're advocating for kids. So you're at the hospital. I'm not exactly different pediatric nurse where you fit in, whether a doctor comes first and then you, like where you are in the process when somebody comes in. Like what kind of things do you talk about new patients who come in? What do you say to them to sort of reassure them and let them know what they might be in for?
Sure. So I have my own panel of patients at times, and I also support the physicians as well. And I'll do follow-up visits as well. So often at Cedars-Sinai, we get second, third, fourth opinions, patients coming from other countries. So they'll often come to specifically see like one of our 2 pediatric IBD doctors, Dr. Ziering or Dr. Ramzadeh. So they will go in, do the whole visit, things like that. And I'm seeing my own patients. I see a lot of general GI too, pediatric. And then at the point where, they're deciding on treatments or procedures, biologic, different things like that. I'm supporting them getting those medications covered by insurance, doing all that sort of fighting behind the scenes. And I also will be brought into the room at times to help support or answer questions. And I do share a bit of my own experience at times when it seems appropriate. I also see we have an infusion center that's next to our clinic. So those are times when I get to really spend time with and I do these sort of follow-up visits, essentially just a full office visit with a patient. And that's when I really do connect and spend time with and make sure they're doing okay, make sure they're up to date with their vaccines, make sure things are going okay with school, just do, basically head to toe visit and check in with where they are socially and see if they're needing any sort of supports. But, a lot of my long-standing patients just kind of even prefer to follow with me for quick visits too, like video visits and things like that. I have sort of that connection, and they know a little bit more about me and how, especially the older females, they kind of have a little bit of a bond there, and we have been through similar things, and they feel more comfortable asking me the other day. They should ask me if she could get Botox. I was like, yeah, sure.
I'm sure there's things you can add being sort of a fellow traveler.
Often, we'll get a call, a call will come through our nurses, our RNs, they triage calls, and then they forward them to me and the physicians into this pool electronically, and then I'll just grab it before the doc has to deal with it. And it'll be questions about the colonoscopy prep, or questions about what actually happens when I bring my kid in for their first colonoscopy or endoscopy. So I can take those phone calls and say, okay, well, first we talk about the prep and little tips and tricks to get through that. And then also we'll talk about what you do when you get there. You're going to change certificate. These are people that are very new to the entire experience. Like this is their baby, their 5-year-old, their 4-year-old, their 15-year-old going in. You're going to put on a hospital gown. The nurse is going to take your vitals, and we talk about it step by step because this is all brand new to them. That's my baby. And then we talk about, they can, they'll get an IV, or they get to get gas before the IV to fall asleep. So, and I get to talk about, all those things. And then also, if the child wants to talk on the phone with me, we can talk about, like, when you wake up, it might be a little gassy, you might have little cramps, but you get to see cool pictures of your inside, and you're like, oh, yeah, that's cool. But, things like that, and we can talk about how you feel. Even things like the fecogram, which it's as pleasant as it sounds. Like, I've been through it several times. I can tell them what it's like. I've asked my physician colleagues, like, have you had one? Do you know what it's like? Do you know what you're really doing? You're like pooping in front of several people, like literally people are watching. So I can talk people through that before they get to the appointment, and they're just shocked. And I know people, friends that have been there, and it can be traumatic when you get to these things that, some physicians will just, not every physician, will just write the script, and they're not quite sure what is actually involved. Even like an MRI, needing contrast rectally and orally and through IV and having to hold. There's just a lot involved.
And you, as an advocate, how do you talk to kids? What age group do you try to deal with?
I talk to a lot of kids who are teens who are being diagnosed or have had IBD. A lot of not close friends, but a lot of people I know over the years have been diagnosed, because I think most people are diagnosed when they're in their teens or young adulthood. And a lot of people I know have gotten colitis, or been like, I'm in the hospital having surgery, this thing happened. And for a lot of them, it's just very, and also a lot of people reach out to my mom's charity, Connect Me for Crohn's and Colitis, and a lot of times she'll talk to the mom of the person, or I'll talk to the person or something. But it's just good to talk to someone, I think, because my area of expertise is like what's going on in a hospital room. I can talk to you about that. So a lot of people experiencing it for the first time, there's a lot going on, there's a lot of anxiety, it's very scary. You don't know how things work when you first go there, and there's a lot of things in the hospital system, even though people don't like to think about it, but there's a lot of things that slip through the cracks that doctors and nurses aren't always thinking about. And it's very important to advocate for yourself and listen to your body and know how you feel, and not just take the word of the doctor or whatever they say. Not that that's bad, just they're not thinking about everything, and they don't know how you feel, which is also very important. But I think just talking to me about Crohn's, and sort of about generally Crohn's, and since I do have a lot of knowledge about it on the subject, hearing from me, I think, is slightly reassuring to them.
When you're talking to young kids, you can go, here I am, I'm 23, I think they're at 24, I'm here, I'm good looking, I'm healthy, I've got a life. I mean, all of you guys are sort of testament that you're going to have a future, you'll get through this initial adjustment.
Yeah, I mean, it's tricky because people ask me about my experience. Yeah, I mean, like you say, when they're asking me about my experience, I always sort of want to be careful, because I don't want to also, like, I had 6 major surgeries between age 11 and 21, and I don't want them to think that is necessarily in their future. And of course, now there's so many more treatments that are available that we didn't have any treatments back when there was prednisone and zolpidem. Zolpidem, shout out over there.
And I'm allergic to prednisone.
Oh, and oh, wow. So yeah. So I don't know what I would have done if. I mean, actually, ultimately, they didn't help because I had to have my entire colon removed. You know, it. I like to talk about also the fact that this is an ecosystem, like to look at this in a larger view, because like also like right now I'm not on any medication. I'm one of like the few people I know with IBD who's not on any medication at the moment. And people will ask me, oh, well, what do you do? Like they want a list of all the things, but it's different for everyone, number one. And number two, there's lots of things that can happen where, depending on what's going on at any particular time, things can impact you differently. So these small things can make a big difference. When I could eat something that I'm normally fine with, and if I'm in a certain condition where I'm more stressed or tense, and I don't give myself space around that, I'm going to have a different kind of reaction than at other times. So I try to give them a bigger picture, and also that everyone's course of their disease is different, and take it one step at a time. But also, it's an opportunity to really learn about your body, and it's a gateway to a deeper life. Really, that's how I look at it.
One of my best friends also has Crohn's, and we talk about it all the time. And we pose the question to each other every few years: Are you happy that you got Crohn's necessarily, and like, or would you have wished yourself to not get Crohn's? And we both always say we would always pick to get Crohn's. It makes for each of us, it makes you so much more of an appreciative person, and when you just focus on, you really need to focus on your day to day and the lifestyle that you live, and what you let affect you exactly. And so when I talk to my other friends who get diagnosed now, I got a friend who's in the hospital right now actually, and you just gotta tell them it's hard to realize. It took me probably 6-7 years to finally settle on that it's an entire lifestyle change, entirely.
Well, that brings us to the artwork. So we'll start with Daniel here. So you've been doing artwork about this for a pretty long time, and it's part of your advocacy to show your art and talk about where your images come from. So, and you've heard me say this a million times, all the art in this gallery, if these people had not had Crohn's, would not exist. And you're the perfect example of you're doing art, you're probably doing more video or something, but you do all this work because of your illness. So why don't you talk about illness as motivation?
Well, I grew up where they're telling you, the doctors were saying, you can't hold this in. You can't hold, like, I had this severe trauma when I was 5. By the way, that painting right there, at the blue one there, that's about when I was in the hospital when I was 5, and that very traumatic experience. And so they're telling you, you got to get these feelings out. So basically, you have all this trauma, you got to get the feelings out, but then you live in a world that's not always, we don't talk about our feelings that often, especially ones that aren't positive, happy, and all that. So for many years prior to painting, I was making different kinds of art, but I wasn't really able to express what I was, what this was like. I would try talking about it, and I had a lot of imagery around it, but I also had this idea, which I formed very early on, that I couldn't draw and I couldn't paint. And then at some point, just before it was like about 14 years ago or 15 years ago, I started doing it, and I just started drawing what I thought it felt like inside. And I also was doing this movement practice, so I incorporated, where I was very consciously moving, I incorporated that into my art making. And I was in a flare around this same time. And so I was using the art, like as I was drawing, I was tracking my body and seeing like, oh, when I start to move this way, I feel an opening in my stomach. I feel a little release in another part of my body. And so that guided a lot of what how I made these. And the other thing is, especially that one there, when I did that, I tried talking about that in therapy for decades. Because right after that happened, I was in therapy,
So what's that painting depicting?
So that's called Tied Up at the Hospital. So when I was diagnosed, there was a first night experience that was scary, which I won't get into right now. But the next day, I thought I was going home, and they were wheeling me out in a gurney. And then suddenly I was taken into this room, and they were trying to put a tube in me, and my parents weren't there, and nobody told me anything. No one gave me any kind of heads up. And I started fighting them off. And instead of talking to me about it, they actually tied me up. So they strapped, it was a little different pose than that, but they strapped me so tightly. I remember my knees, even now when my knees touch, I still go back to that place. My wrists, my knees, everything was tied up. And the little figure you see that's coming out of the main figure are my emotions leaving my body, dissociating. That was extremely traumatic, obviously, and informed the rest of my life, essentially. And I tried describing it at different times. I remember talking to someone in high school, trying to explain to them what it was like, talking to therapists, like I said. But when I actually did that, I did that in an 8 or 10 hours straight painting session. And it was so powerful because I was able to re-experience it, but not just I was able to move the energy while I was re-experiencing it. So I wasn't just stuck with it. I was able to move it and do something with it and maybe feel like I had some kind of control over it,
Morgan, I was watching your face while he's explaining this, and you were what do you think of how different it is now? That would never happen now, I'm hoping.
Well, you had asked us to look around and pick out a painting that spoke with you, and that was the one that spoke to me. First of all, sorry. That's happened to me twice. As a new graduate nurse, when I had my colectomy, and then again just this summer, when I was in the hospital for months, where I was restrained physically. They knew I was an NP in the field, and I was restrained, and the call bell was kicked out of my way.
No sedative or anything, even as an adult,
the first time was I had a very complicated. I had my colon removed when I was 25. My ulcerative colitis was not responding to medication, and I had a very urgent colectomy and a J pouch created. My incision, like yours, from here to here, foot long, got infected. I was a new nurse grad. I went back to school after my traditional undergraduate degree, so I was a little older. And they knew I was a nurse, so a new nurse, baby nurse. But nobody was sort of checking my incision. I was like, yeah, it's a little warm to the touch. I feel like this isn't right. None of the surgical residents were checking my incision, and it was weeks, and I was feverish, and then all of a sudden, somebody checked, and it was fully infected. And I had my ostomy here, and it had to be opened immediately. They didn't wheel me into the OR or anything. They opened it bedside. I had a port in my neck, so I had a direct line to get meds and things. And the whole time, pain meds were not adequately administered. I have a very high tolerance for medication, and even from my parents, I was probably a drug addict, and they were telling them, yeah,
Nice.
looking for track marks under my toenails. So they didn't pre-medicate me. I was held down and I was opened up without pre-meds for the wound to open. So that happened. And then again, recently I was having complications. I had my pouch revised and a nurse came in and my NG tube kept coming out of place. They weren't using the correct tape. I told them. I'm like the worst patient. And it kept coming out of place. I was just so raw in my throat from having it in there for several weeks. And I just asked, I knew that there was a psychiatric component to it. I was very anxious. And I was like, can I have something for my anxiety? Can I have something for my pain before you start jamming it down again? And it's like, nope, we're doing it now. It's like, no, you need to come back. And he got on top, stood over top of me, held my hands down, kicked the collet out of the way, and just jammed it down my throat. But this is July, so it still happens.
I could see it happening to a kid, but I'm amazed that.
I mean, I'm a strong person, but like this is me with a very large man. One-on-one, this is my dad, but my parents were there, and they were taking shifts because this is something that I knew had happened before, and I was getting prepared for this mentally to go back in the hospital. And they had taken a break, and lo and behold, it happened again. So it still happens. Not for my patient, hopefully.
Well, you're there to be the buffer. Let's get back to the art. So you're a writer. How has writing helped you get through all this? And what story are you trying to tell?
Well, like Daniel, I felt repressed emotionally, very much so, and had to do with the bullying, but also like, I don't know, when you don't feel good at school, you don't want to interact with kids, and then you don't feel open to expressing yourself. And so poetry was actually my awakening. It was the only way that I could let out that emotion, and it was the only way that my mind would let me release it. I couldn't speak it. Every time I would go to a therapist, they would be like, "Why are you sending him here? He's fine." And I would go to, even alone in my room, I would try and like yell or scream. Nothing would come out, and just writing pure. I started with a stream of consciousness a little bit, and then I don't know, I always loved hip hop, and so I would take my favorite beats and I put them to it. But first, I would just write different verses. I don't know, my brain thought the rhyme sounded nice. I always liked Dr. Seuss, but I would hopefully didn't do Seuss rhyming too much. I remember I was with my friends after senior year. I had this awakening. We were in nature, and I was just like, okay, I have to feel. It's okay to feel, and I have to.
I was going to say, I always found when I would be frustrated by my illness, the batting cages were always really good because you could just hit. I put it on very slow so I wouldn't miss because I'm not very coordinated, and just hit as much stuff as I could with a bat. That always helped.
Well, I self-taught myself to box, actually, to help me with that. And my friends and I, we had orchestrated under the table boxing sort of club at school. And so we would orchestrate different boxing matches with each other. And I actually went to the hospital after one, not because of the boxing, but because I had a Crohn's flare. And it's so I was trying to, my Napoleon complex a little bit through the boxing, but
you didn't get punched in the stomach, did you?
I probably did a bunch of times, but I trained a lot for it, and but yeah, when I was in the hospital, I just accepted that I was going to die at a certain point, and like you said, try to talk with therapists about that. No one gets it. Like, you just accept that that's it.
Yeah.
And what's next, and you try to, and I don't know, it's a little relieving. You know, you don't have to deal with it anymore in your mind, but then it doesn't happen, and you have sort of this guilt that it didn't happen.
And what about you? You don't have work up on the wall, but do you have an outlet that
I play
helps you?
piano. I do a lot of music. I've been playing piano since I was young, and it helps. But yeah, I just want to say, like, I have a lot of hospital experiences and stuff. None as visceral or torturous as that, but things that I'm like still not talking about right now. So that you guys were able to talk about that, I just want to say it's incredible.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for sharing that. It's very, because these things, like, you know, things happen to us, and then, you know, everyone else moves on, but they stick with us. I mean, that's the things that have stuck with us over the years. And yeah, I have, you know, those doctors don't remember that probably. Doctors mess up and hospitals mess up a lot, and people don't talk about that. Sorry, I'm not advocating that all the doctors should be fired. It's not what I'm doing.
Yeah, music has helped me a lot too, like the vibrations and everything.
Yeah.
It's cathartic to just express.
Especially playing with other people too.
Definitely.
Yeah.
With 3 point whatever I read million people with this, do you guys find when you go out, like you, Daniel, especially people just come up to you at the gallery and go, "Oh, I'm dealing with this. It's so nice to see someone talk about it." And like you guys, you know, you started out by saying you don't normally talk about it, but you give people an opportunity with your writing and your artwork to talk about it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I don't have many. I can't think of many like random things, but yeah, I'm always like the guy who, if somebody knows someone, you know, if I have a friend who knows someone who has Crohn's, I'll get a call, and you know, and then I'm also help facilitate the patient support groups for Connecting the Cure, and so there's every month we're talking about stuff in there.
Is there any of the other art in here that speaks to any of you guys? You already mentioned Daniel's.
I particularly enjoy the AI. Do I have a title? I don't know.
Yeah, I know the title.
I don't know the title, but McCall had one. Yeah.
Yeah, those are great.
Yeah.
I don't know why or what it is.
It's just so jarring that it's like.
I don't find it gross at all.
Yeah, but I feel like it's because we've been a little numb to it. But it's like it just shows exactly what it is.
It's interesting as somebody who doesn't have this. I saw those, and the first thing I thought of was like the movie Alien.
Well, the writer in Daniel Bannon had he's passed, but he had Crohn's, and that scene is based on his experience of it. That was his way of visualizing or helping to visualize it because he wrote it. But yeah,
and that's what those pictures look like to me, because they're, you know, as someone who doesn't have this, you don't really know how is the bag attached, how is this, what's in your body, what's out of your body, you know. I mean, I know now because of this, I've researched, I've done stuff, but you know, normally, I mean, I've known you for a decade now, and I'd have no idea if we didn't know each other through this network of patient artists. Anything's going on with you.
Yeah, yeah. And I think that's one of the important things about these types of exhibits is sort of making, because these are still invisible illnesses. And so we have things going on, all of us, that people can't see, and they think, oh, well, what, you know, why can't you do that? Or there's just every part of your life basically is impacted by this disease, and it's hard to get people to understand how every little decision gets so much more complicated. Like every time you have to go somewhere, every time just let's go meet for a meal or whatever. That's like a whole ordeal, you know? And like right when I hear that, my anxiety goes up.
People don't understand, and you try and be polite, but you can't eat certain things, and you can't go certain places. You don't want to be difficult. You don't want to be a burden, but then you just can't. Everything is affected, and people think you're lazy or you're not working your hardest, but they don't know that you are about to pass out, because you're so depleted or something like that, or and the trauma that comes with it. I think the number one thing that I'm realizing lately that people don't understand is the psychological effect, because if you feel pain for so often of the day, you're not going to feel good mentally about yourself or just be positive or optimistic.
And just to chime in on the artwork, Andrik's pieces, I don't know if I'm saying that. Are you? Yeah, there he is right there. And Jared, they're both in the other room there, along with the pieces that Lowell mentioned. Those really, I mean, I resonate with basically everything in here, but those ones stick out to me as ones that really impact me. So definitely go check those out after.
I should shout out some art probably. Everything is so great. Daniel has your yellow one. Is that in the back?
Oh,
Right?
that's that.
I love I love that one. The lamb chops over there make me hungry every time I look at it, because it's so important. I try to get into cooking too, because you don't need all these different ingredients to make something taste good, and that shows that. And then I would finally say the legs and the horse over there, because as Daniel and I were saying earlier, it's not just about the literal effects of the disease. It's how the emotional repression and just letting all that out will just aid your life and healing.
As the youngest one up here, I think. How old are you?
I'm 24 too, but I don't know when our birthday.
Okay. Well, both you guys. It seems to me, and I don't have kids, but my experience is through my partner's kids. And I'll talk to her, and she'd always go, "These kids now, they're so accepting of differences." And do you find that in school? Because I know at my advanced age, kids were not too accepting of kids who were different in class with them before mainstreaming and stuff.
I think that it's hard to, for me, having Crohn's and being very having a lot of things from my life being dictated by Crohn's as a kid. It's like explaining all of it to kids you can't do, because they won't get it. But I do, especially younger kids. But when I was in school, I went to school every day, but there were a lot of days I came into school late because I was doing NG tube feeding the night before, and I was having a lot of pain in the morning or whatever. I was vomiting, and the other kids were always very happy to see me when I got there. It was it was nice, but again, like when I was in the hospital, they sent me cards, whole school card, but it's very, superficial. But not to say that that isn't better than what you experience or other people experience at school with kids who aren't as accepting. But I do think now, just because also, more parents know about it and it's more popular, and I think kids in general are more accepting.
So parents, let's talk about parents in this. You have to, I presume you're there when a lot of people come in, their kids get diagnosed, and then the parents have that whole worry of, is my kid going to have a good life? Or are they going to, and again, you're someone who can hold up your life and go, look how productive I am, and I have a good life, and I've got a kid and a husband. But why don't you talk about the family comes in, the kid's been diagnosed, and dealing with the parents?
Sure, and we actually have a medical social worker on staff who does a lot of the psychosocial support. But I come in on a case-by-case basis and can, talk to parents about, yes, like, you can accomplish these things. And, especially once we start with medication therapy, a lot is given via IV. More and more given via shots that you can give to yourself or buy pills now, which is exciting. But I always, tell families, depending on the age of diagnosis, that the disease in itself isn't going to be limiting as far as like goals. A lot of families are worried that the child won't be able to go to college or, have a career, or, they kind of those bigger goals, those bigger life goals, or play sports, or, do all of these things. And just by how connected I have been in my life through my own disease, through Connection to Cure, or like when I was diagnosed, it was Crohn's and Colitis Foundation. I'm from Philadelphia, so I knew some people, of my age when I was diagnosed that were playing sports with ostomy bags and that sort of thing. I can kind of walk through and give them examples of how this isn't a limiting illness, and how that they're actually, I'm a little biased, but I do think they're in the best hands, at least on the West Coast. That we are going to get their kid as healthy as possible, so that they're not impacted as greatly as they need to be, to get back to at least where they were before.
There's a lot of, well, not a lot, but some celebrities with Crohn's.
Yeah,
which growing up was always cool. Not that we know, like my case of Crohn's is very severe. Obviously, I don't know how severe any of their cases of Crohn's was, but I remember when I was growing up, I was really into this quarterback, David Gerard. He is Crohn's.
Larry Nance Jr.
There
was
you go.
always
Yeah,
my
Larry
favorite.
Nance.
More recent times.
Oh yeah.
Huh? That's who, exactly. That's who I was thinking about. Yeah.
Oh.
And he played with an ostomy, right? Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. That was like the one celebrity back then.
That
He actually
sounds-
called
yeah.
me when I was in the hospital.
Oh.
And I loved that team already.
Yes, it's getting better, but I would say kids that know about it are nice about it. Because when my symptoms sort of started, my entire social friend group changed completely, and I actually missed my dean told me this. I was the kid who missed the most days of school, and still graduated of all time at my high school.
That's a good record.
That's what I thought. Yeah.
You get calls about that?
I wish. But yes, and then I was super punctual before this, but then now like it's about I'm late to like everything or right on time to things, because just you get anxious and then it's like, oh, I'm just on the toilet for 15 extra minutes or 30 extra minutes, and then yeah. But I would say the kids that know about it are definitely nicer, but it's the kids that don't know about it. They're like, oh, this kid's weird. This kid's gone all the time. This kid, is unreliable.
I would just say also there's a lot of kids who obviously don't know, but there's a lot of adults who don't know.
Oh, 100%.
Right.
Like
Yeah, teachers.
I talk to adults who, know absolutely nothing about Crohn's disease.
Question I get asked all the time: do you think a cure will happen in your life?
I haven't figured out a good answer to that question actually.
I always say no, but because I'm pessimistic. But
That just shuts it down right there. So maybe that's.
Well, if it gives you any hope, my illness, I gave bone marrow when I was 6, and there was a treatment when I was 42. So sometimes you just have to be. I always say you have to be a patient.
yeah.
Would you have gone into medicine? As far as you would have done something else had you not had this?
Definitely gone elsewhere. I loved animals. Definitely would have been a veterinarian. In college, I had ulcerative colitis at that time. I was sort of pursuing animal behavior for a bit, and then gradually with doing some research with Children's Hospital in Philly, and then attending as a volunteer the camp for kids with Crohn's and colitis and collecting data for some of the research there on patient experience or camper experience. I was hanging out with the nurse practitioners and the nurses a little bit more, and I sort of got indoctrinated into their, I don't know, they just kind of really, that's sort of where I saw myself. And I had coffee with one of the women I was doing research with, a nurse practitioner who had a J pouch. I actually hadn't had surgery yet at that point. But I was telling her all the things I liked and what my goals were in life. And she said, I think you want to be a nurse practitioner. And I said, and she talked to me about it. I was like, yeah, I think so. And we walked, like literally just walked over to University of Pennsylvania and picked up an application. This is after I graduated from college for the accelerated BSN MSN program, for the pediatric program, filled it out. I applied to a few others, I got into Penn. Okay, I'm done.
That's great. Sometimes it's always interesting when someone sees something in you that like you don't always see in yourself. That happens to me around illness a lot.
That happened to me around art.
Yeah.
When Anna and I, this is my wife Anna, the first time we kissed, she pushed me away and she said, I can't be with an artist. And I was like, what? What are you talking? Because I never thought of myself as an artist. This is 20 years before I started painting.
So it wasn't the colostomy, it was like
Right.
you were an artist.
Right, exactly. That's what I was worried about.
Are there any questions for our esteemed panel here?
I'm curious, well, I think you talked about some advocacy groups, but I'm wondering if the hospitals and doctors are advocating for that and creating that? Or somebody?
We advocate for our patients. Actually, usually Stacy's my go-to. So we have our medical social worker who's inundated with cases and things, but we're constantly writing letters. I help out too with the pediatric patients. We write letters for schools. I'll talk to principals who aren't getting it.
Are there groups for the kids?
Oh, groups for the kids? Well, Stacy runs them.
I mean, you don't have to be like,
Not yet.
right now, we have a program.
Yeah.
I'm not saying, we want to do it. That's what I'm hearing is, if you have been 10 years old and been with another 10-year-old, 3 10-year-olds, it really would have made a difference for them.
When I was back east in Philadelphia, I got involved with Crohn's and Colitis Foundation, or my parents did, and then I was able to talk to, similar to what Stacy does, they connected me with other people my age, and then when I needed to have my surgery when I was older, I circled back and was able to connect with a young man who had had my surgery and was able to kind of exchange some texts right beforehand. But right now I think it's just kind of a little matchmaking, and we're able to kind of like set people up. And we do that too. We kind of like, we'll talk to each other and say, okay, I have a 7-year-old who has Crohn's, just diagnosed. Who else has a 7-year-old?
I wanted to introduce you to Stacy. She's Connecting the Cure. They're sponsoring this event that we have today, and all the proceeds for all the artwork, the sales of the artwork, 25% is going to charity, to Stacy. So she's here. She's going to speak.
I want to thank the panel and thank the gallery and our sponsor, and thank you all for coming.
Thank you.